Welcome to AmdiVibes, where today, we are telling a story that most of the world has never heard. A story that belongs to West Africa. A story about a woman so ferocious, so brilliant, so completely unwilling to accept the limitations her world tried to place on her, that her enemies genuinely believed she did not sleep, that she could not be killed, that she was something more than human. They were wrong about that last part, but they were not entirely wrong about the first two. This is the story of Queen Idia, the first queen mother of the Benin Empire, the woman who built an army, mastered the arts of war and spirit, saved a collapsing kingdom, and was nearly written out of the history books by the very empire she created. You're going to want to sit down for this one. Before we can talk about Idia, we need to talk about what she was fighting for. Because the Benin Empire was no small thing. At its peak, it dominated a huge territory in what is now southern Nigeria. Its capital, Benin City, was one of the largest, most sophisticated cities on the planet at the time. When European traders and later colonizers first arrived, they were absolutely stunned. They saw wide, carefully planned streets, a palace complex of extraordinary scale and beauty, and bronze statues cast with such technical genius that European experts initially refused to believe they were made in Africa. It was a world of elaborate governance, trade, and law. At the center of it all sat the Iyoba, the king, divine, absolute, surrounded by a court of incredible complexity. And behind the Iyoba, in the shadows, in the spaces that formal records don't always reach, was the Iyoba, the Queen Mother, the most powerful woman in the empire, a position that didn't even exist before Idia, because Idia created it. Idia was born in the late 15th century, and the Benin Empire was in crisis. The Iyoba, Ozaliwa, was a great warrior king, but he had multiple wives and multiple sons. His court was a place of both beauty and brutality. Succession politics in Benin were not gentle. Sons competed, alliances formed and then dissolved in an instant. Choosing the wrong ally could get you killed. Idia was one of Ozaliwa's wives. She wasn't the most senior, not the most powerful, and definitely not the obvious choice to become the mother of the next Iyoba. But she had a son. His name was Ezegi, and Idia decided, with the absolute certainty of a woman who has looked at the world and calculated exactly what it will cost, that her son would be Iyoba. Not any of the other sons, not the candidates with more powerful mothers or higher positions at court. Her son. And so, she began to work. This is where the story really catches fire. When Obi Ozaliwa died, the succession crisis exploded into open conflict. Ezegi, Idia's son, faced a direct military challenge from his own brother, Arhuran, who controlled the important city of Udo. This wasn't just a political rivalry settled with clever words in the court. This was war, real war, with armies and casualties, and the fate of the entire empire hanging in the balance. Ezegi had a huge problem. Arhuran's forces were formidable. His position was strong. By any conventional military logic, Ezegi was not going to win. Idia solved the problem. She fought on multiple fronts, simultaneously, with a strategic intelligence that her enemies couldn't match and couldn't explain. Which is why they eventually concluded she was supernatural. She raised her own forces, not the standard palace guard, but her own soldiers, loyal specifically to her, recruited from networks she had been building for years. She also deployed her deep knowledge of spiritual practices, particularly those involving Asen, the powerful river goddess associated with warfare and protection. Now, whether this worked through genuine spiritual power, or through the psychological terror of facing an enemy who seemed to have supernatural backing, the result was the same. Ezegi's enemies broke. Not easily, but they broke. The turning point came when an external threat arrived at the same time as the internal one. The Igala kingdom to the north saw the succession crisis as an opportunity and invaded Benin territory. Most commanders would have been completely overwhelmed, fighting a civil war and a foreign invasion at the same time. But Idia did not break. She fought both at the same time. Oral traditions and later court records both describe her as being physically present on the battlefield, leading her troops. The Igala were defeated. Arhuran was defeated. Ezegi became Iyoba. And the Benin Empire, which had been collapsing in real time, was held together by the will of one woman who refused to let it fall. So, why did they say she never slept? The answer is both practical and mythological. The practical answer is this: Idia could not afford to sleep in the way that people with security do. She operated in an environment of constant threat. The succession crisis didn't just end when Ezegi took the throne. Courts don't become safe just because a battle is won. The defeated parties go underground, alliances reform, and the knives come out in different rooms. Idia maintained her power through relentless vigilance. She couldn't afford the political vulnerability of sleep. She couldn't afford to stop watching, stop calculating, stop being 10 steps ahead of everyone who wanted what she had built. The mythological answer is even deeper. The tradition around Idia holds that she was an initiate of powerful spiritual practices that operated at night, that she moved in the space between waking and sleeping, between the visible world and the spirit world, with the freedom ordinary mortals didn't have. Many of these spiritual traditions involve night practices, rituals conducted in darkness. Her enemies, the people who fought her and lost, who couldn't understand how she always seemed to know their plans before they did, decided the only explanation was that she never slept, that she was always watching, always present, in the physical world and the spirit world at the same time. It became her legend. And in the Benin Empire, legends were power. After the wars were won and Ezegi was secure on the throne, something unprecedented happened. Ezegi created a formal position for his mother, the Iyoba, Queen Mother of Benin. It had never existed before. Sure, the empire had powerful women, influential mothers of Obas, but there had been no formal title, no palace, no institutional power specifically for the Oba's mother. Idia changed that. The Iyoba was given her own palace, her own court, her own duties. She was the only woman allowed to wear certain sacred beaded regalia. She participated in the most important ceremonies of the empire. She was formally, permanently part of the power structure, not behind the throne, but beside it. The position Idia created survived her by centuries. Every Oba of Benin after Ezegi had an Iyoba. The position exists, in a ceremonial sense, to this day. Idia didn't just save the empire, she rewrote its constitution. Here's where the story takes its most haunting turn. In 1897, the British military launched a brutal attack on Benin City. They burned the city, looted the palace, and stole thousands of extraordinary bronze and ivory artworks. Among the objects taken were several pieces depicting a woman. A specific woman. Her face is calm, her regalia elaborate. Her expression carries a quality that art historians still struggle to describe, something between serenity and absolute authority. She wore the beaded chakra of the Iyoba. She was Idia, or rather, she was the idealized image of Idia that court artists had been producing for over a century after her death. Because that is what the Benin bronze tradition did. It remembered, in metal, in detail, in objects made to last forever. These bronzes of Idia, scattered across museums in London and elsewhere, became central to one of the most important cultural repatriation debates of the 20th century. Then in 1977, Nigeria was hosting the Second World Festival of Black Arts and Culture. The image they chose as the symbol for the entire festival, representing the cultural richness of the entire African diaspora, was the face of Idia, a woman who lived in the 15th century, whose name most of the world had never heard, whose story had been buried under centuries of colonial erasure, chosen to represent the soul of African culture to the entire world. Because somehow, even after everything, her face still carried it. So what does the story of Queen Idia teach us? First, it teaches us that the people who save empires are not always the ones the empires remember. Idia held the Benin Empire together, fought its wars, and built its institutions. And the official histories, written by courts more comfortable with kings than with the women behind them, reduced her to a footnote. Until the bronzes kept her face alive. Until oral traditions kept her name alive. The second lesson is about the cost of vigilance. Idia never slept because she couldn't afford to, because the world she lived in did not offer the luxury of rest to women who held power. There's something both admirable and tragic in that. And the final lesson is about what survives. The Benin bronzes, stolen, scattered. and debated, have kept Idia's face in front of the world for over a century. Art is the longest memory. Stories are the longest memory. Empires fall. Palaces burn. Official histories get written by whoever won. But the face in the bronze endures. And the story, finally told, endures with it. Here at AmdiVibes, we exist for exactly this reason. To find the faces in the bronze. To find the stories that were buried and bring them back into the light. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to AmdiVibes for more stories that the world forgot and needs to remember. We'll see you in the next one.